Welcome back to Rockstock Channel. It is Monday, December 16th, and today we have, actually for the first time, we're interviewing live Vivas Kumar from Mitra Chem. He is someone, though, that has appeared on Rockstock Channel, actually in our very second video when he was at Benchmark Minerals Intelligence around the time of Tesla Battery Day, and there was big news there. Our second video is Tesla's Piedmont Lithium. But before then, just a quick intro to Vivas before we start talking about this company, this private company that he started while he was a Stanford student. We met in 2018. I had written, Ganfeng went public around the same time that Livent went public, and I went through their prospectus and I wrote an analysis to try to get my head around Ganfeng, and that led you to send me a LinkedIn message, right? This was an interesting note. Thanks. If you ever want a tour of Tesla, come and see me. So I was working with Piedmont Lithium there, and took you up on that, organized a tour. Maybe we'll put up a picture here. I'm not taking responsibility for Tesla's offtake with Piedmont, but
and I'm not either, by the way.
That happened in 2020. So, but it did start with that introduction in 2018. I then recall you letting us know, and you introduced us to your colleagues who ended up doing that deal, Sarah Maricel, who is now at Arcadium. But you also mentioned that you had sold your Tesla stock to invest in yourself and an MBA, at Stanford. And when we were talking last week, Vivas, you had mentioned that it was like the 5th year anniversary, of the first COVID case. And then, suddenly 2020 was the pandemic, ZIRP, zero interest rates, TINA, there is no alternative, stimmy checks, there was SPAC Mania. The All In podcast, which I'm a religious listener to, started back then with Chamath-Backed, and you had all these, MP materials I wrote. We called them premature e-speculations. Then that led to Battery Day, and there was actually a Chamath had an investment contest. He advertised this on Twitter, and I wrote a 7-page, idea, which he never responded to, which was to fund, lithium hydroxide from spodumene strategy within the United States. But you had a happier interaction, with Chamath, which you could share, in a second. I was listening to the latest All In podcast, and at the very end, Chamath, did comment again about critical mineral policy. Maybe we'll insert a snippet of that into this video.
Chamath, your thoughts on tariffs and/or immigration and inflation? And that seems to be a place where even across the aisle, you got people debating it.
I think Keith said it pretty well, which is that we do have a lot of experience with how tariffs can be implemented, and that the practical experience is not what the fear-mongering is about. That being said, I think the devil will be in the details. Which markets, for which goods, what is the tariff, and why? What I hope happens is that if we can really study the second and third order degree impacts of some of these markets, what the tariff does is it acts almost as a reverse subsidy for American companies to compete. I'll give you one very narrow example. If you believe in electrifying the American economy, one of the underlying things that you need are electric motors, right? Electric motors and electric batteries. And just to double click on electric motors for a second, electric motors needs a permanent magnet. If you look inside of a permanent magnet, there are these rare earths that are just required to make these magnets. But as it turns out, it is impossible for any company that is not a Chinese company to be able to manufacture these magnets in an economically viable way. And the reason is because not only can China make it, and they can make it in the absence of a lot of environmental controls, they'll also subsidize. So if anybody tries to compete, they'll just inject a subsidy into that economic supply chain where they're always cheaper. So what do you do, Jason? If you can observe that and realize that we want supply chain diversity, what the tariff does is it starts to push back on those kinds of activities because it doesn't allow it to continue to work. Then if you take that with what the United States government already does through the DOE, which is through subsidies and underwriting, this is what I mean by it could be a really amazing new moment for the American economy. And that would please a lot of people, including a lot of people on the left, if they just took the time to understand what's being proposed.
I mean, look at rare earths. You mentioned them. We have some of the great deposits in the world in our country. Why
we
can't
have one
we
of
get
the
them?
largest lithium deposits in the world.
It's because of environmental regulations. And it's the same thing with Starship going up. We got a lot of regulations in this country. I understand people want to do the right thing, but we also have a lot of debt. And if we could start mining rare earth metals here and maybe loosen the regulations.
The lithium supply chain is another really good one that's emblematic of all of this. But there are so many other markets. Like I'm sure that if you looked in something that's a little bit more down the middle, like appliances, what you would also see is the same thing where Whirlpool will try to make an appliance or Bissell will try to make a vacuum cleaner. And the Chinese equivalent makes it almost like fighting uphill. And there has to be a way to course correct that.
Well, I mean, look at BYD. Some of these cars, they're just copying wholesale everything Tesla's done in their design and feature set, and they're half the price. And so they're selling really well in countries that allow them, and they would decimate U.S. automakers.
I was at Fast Markets event. I think it was in 2020. It was like virtually empty, but I was sitting next to Ernie Ortiz, and he like elbowed me. Did you hear about Vivas? He got like, seed funding, for AI for LFP cathodes, right? That's all I knew. That was just the headline. It was a relatively easy time to raise money. It's now a more difficult time. And today's kind of hot topics, other than introducing yourself and the chat, we have like three here. Is if you could just share, your perspectives on, the evolution of, the venture capital community and U.S. government funding landscape over the last few years. You are someone who both knows the resource side, but are also of and part of Silicon Valley. So across the EV battery midstream, upstream supply chain, if you could talk about this uninterruptible power theme that's tied to kind of AI and data centers, as well as the other hot topic, which is just U.S.-China geopolitics, and is there the perspective of a grand bargain with China to build not only EVs, batteries, cathodes, anodes, and possibly even raw material upstream, in the U.S. So with that, why don't you start just telling us about how Mitra Chem got seed funded with your famous friend?
Yeah, well, so let's take a few steps back because I want to fill in some of the story that you mentioned over here of our past together, Howard, which is that I was at Tesla at a very formative time. So I joined before the Model 3, and Tesla was still a sort of niche premium vehicle manufacturer. There were still lots of people who, when I mentioned in summer of 2016 that I was going to work at Tesla, still had no idea what Tesla was, or maybe they had seen a Model S on the road somewhere and equated it to that. It was still seen as a very niche company, although the vision was there. And when the Model 3 was coming out, it was going to be, I figured that it would be an interesting opportunity to at least experience bringing a product out to market that was going to be relevant for the mass market and bring electrification to the forefront of automotive in a way that we haven't done in the Western world basically since the early 1900s when the first EVs were made. Or it was just going to fall flat on its face and I would leave to go to business school and reset my career after that. So those were basically the only two options that I saw. It was either a 1 or a 0. And obviously we know how the story's been written so far, which is that the Model 3 became a phenomenally successful product. It inspired the other automotives to also start transitioning towards electric vehicles, which created a revolution in terms of the financing of and the build out of a battery supply chain globally. That's the basis of multiple companies that you cover in your newsletter and on this podcast as well. and of which my company is now a part of that movement as well. So back in 2016, I joined Tesla. I started working on the lithium supply chain in early 2017. And my remit was pretty straightforward, which was over the next 2 years or so, go out and secure the lithium supply chain for the next 10 plus years of Tesla. We were working in an industry that had typically relied on 6-month contracts, 9-month contracts, 12-month contracts, even as short as 3-month contracts sometimes. And we were aggressively going out and bidding for 5-year contracts. The reason that we were doing that is because we knew that we could give certainty for demand in exchange for getting the certainty of supply that we wanted from the counterparties with whom we did business. So the publicly announced relationships from that time that Tesla had with lithium were, and I'm just talking about the press releases that were put out, were the Ganfeng deal, and of course there was a huge, press moment on that in China due to the regulatory filings that needed to be done. There was, I'm pretty sure, the company that was previously known as Livent, which at the time they were FMC Lithium, also had made it known to the world that Tesla was a customer. There was press done around Kidman Resources, and all of this was done when I was covering lithium over there, right? So you can fill in the gaps. I was clearly very involved with those deals. And there's several more that weren't made public and just out of good faith and discretion for the parties involved. I'm not going to name them, but I'll say that it wasn't just those 3 companies that we did business with. There were a few other lithium players. And the broader team that I was involved with, it was the first time that a non-Chinese auto was very aggressively going out and courting supply contracts and setting up a long-term battery supply chain. That's what inspired me to think about what are the problems that I wanted to solve in the battery supply chain, independent of being at Tesla. Part of what my time at Tesla did also was just the exposure to Elon inspired me to take an entrepreneurial path myself, seeing what this company was able to accomplish across so many different industries and against all odds. I felt like, this is a journey that I want to take myself. When I looked at the growth of the Western battery supply chain at the time, there were lots of companies that wanted to do lithium, that wanted to do anode. There were plenty of cell players. So Northvolt, which is a whole topic that we can talk about here as well today, was founded by 2 former Tesla alums with whom I had a relationship from our time at Tesla. And there were obviously plenty of EV startups, multiple of whom came out via SPACs during that SPAC Mania in 2020 and 2021 that you're talking about. But we identified that the place where there was the least investment, but that was also very critical for building a battery supply chain, was in electrode materials, but specifically cathode active materials. So that was one of the foundational problems that I wanted to solve coming out of my time at Tesla when I went to Stanford Business School. And it was from that time that I came up with this company, Mitra Chem. So the goal of Mitra Chem is to solve 3 problems. The first is speed, using an in-house machine learning advantage to significantly reduce the time to bring a battery materials product from lab to market. The second is a focus on iron-rich cathode active material, which are safer, cheaper, and come from cleaner supply chains than your traditional Western nickel-rich solutions. And finally, it was to build manufacturing scale to be U.S. Inflation Reduction Act compliant. And this is even before the IRA, but we had a feeling that something like the IRA was coming just because of conversations that I had been involved in DC from my time both at Tesla and at Benchmark Minerals. And all of this was going on in summer 2020 when, like you mentioned, Chamath-Backed, who is he was our first benefactor for this business. He's still on the board. He's still somebody who I speak with very frequently about business strategy for Mitra Chem. He was running this competition for climate ideas. And so like you, Howard, I sent in a paper, and I actually didn't hear anything back on the paper when I was pitching them on the need for more of a critical minerals supply chain in the United States. But the specific angle that I took was cathode is severely underinvested outside of China. I didn't hear back. And then just via Twitter interactions, I ended up having a conversation with him that led to an in-person, that led to multiple in-persons, that led to this company being born in the way that it's born right now. So Twitter is powerful. Social media is powerful. I mean,
That's
I
amazing.
certainly get annoyed sometimes at how distracted I can get by just sitting on Twitter for hours on end, but it led this company being founded. So there's a lot of value there.
It's quite amazing, the power of that. Did you remember what the first tweet was that got his attention?
It was actually a friend of mine, Sahil Bloom, and I want to give him a shout out. He saw Chamath tweet something about batteries and then basically tagged me and said, "Hey, Chamath, you should talk to Vivas." And those two gentlemen had known each other before. So that is what actually started the cascading effect of us kind of going back and forth on Twitter.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I follow him, Sahil Bloom. So I'll let Rodney ask his questions, but for my entire life of 15 years, kind of like in the lithium supply chain, I've always kind of understood that we wanted to be in the upstream raw materials because we saw that's where we thought profits were. We thought EVs would be kind of a low margin business because if you just view it as a traditional auto company, that's a low margin business. And batteries, somewhere in between. But like the cathode was always like scrunched in between. And if you looked at the Umicore and others, they were never super profitable, right? So when I heard you were going to, and when I saw, I think JB Straubel recycling, but also cathode, I just said like that's a big nut to crack, right? Because the history of cathodes has just not been the most profitable segment. So, how did you, when analyzing, I'm going to go into cathodes, did you think about that, or what do you think about that?
What we thought about was not necessarily unit margins on the specific product that we were going to make. We were thinking about where the biggest potential for supply dislocation was going to be, and we wanted to go and plug that gap. I come from the standpoint of having been an automotive buyer. You're generally always trying to find what is the biggest risk or bottleneck in your supply chain, and either giving offtake or providing capital to plug that hole. And when you've made billions of dollars of investment across the entire supply chain, and there's one piece of that supply chain that's about to break, trust me, you're willing to pay what it takes to get that material. So the historical context of cathode being a relatively low margin product is not something that we thought would define the future of the industry. Even look at lithium refining margins now. 8 years ago, 10 years ago, when I was first starting to get into this business, the historical trend for lithium chemicals was that it was low price, it was low margin. The people who wanted to make it generally did it as an afterthought as compared to the other chemicals businesses that they had going on. They did it because they wanted to dispose of lithium as a waste product sometimes. And now lithium is a standalone pure play business. We saw that the industry was going to be heading in that direction for multiple different parts of the supply chain that were underinvested. The second is, we didn't start by wanting to be a cathode company. We started by wanting to be a specialty chemicals company that focused on decarbonization materials by combining relevant product theses with an acceleration thesis. It's just that the first product thesis we went after was iron-rich cathode because we saw an opportunity, given the skill sets that we had, the context, the contacts, the experience that we had as a founding team, along with the interception of where the supply chain dislocation was going to happen. So while we're focused today on iron-rich cathode, the vision for Mitra Chem 25, 30, 50 years from now is not that we're making cathode. It's that we're a diversified specialty chemicals company. And cathode is just the starting off point because we happen to be at a time now of mass electrification where these materials are really sorely needed.
All right, Rodney.
Okay, great. So, Vivas, you've answered a couple of my questions already, but if you can, for the listeners, just give an idea of, you mentioned you commercializing iron-based cathodes. You've got 3 products. It's LFP, LMFP, and LMX. Can you just give the listeners an overview of where you are and some of the idea of timelines and production capacity in those products?
LFP is obviously a well-known, well-industrialized chemistry used at scale for multiple years now, starting first in China and then now increasingly so in the Western world for nearly 2 decades at this point. We make LFP at the multi-ton scale. We're working right now on large-scale commercialization of LFP. The way in which we're doing that, so we're recording this episode in December of 2024. About 4 months ago, we got very positive news from the US Department of Energy that we were selected for a $100 million grant from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law program to build a facility alongside our partner Sun Chemical in Muskegon, Michigan for LFP. And that capacity we're looking to bring online early 2027. The project that we pitched to the DOE was that we wanted to build initially about 15,000 tons per annum of capacity over there, and then go and build an additional 15,000 after the first 15,000 was completed. The other reason for why I believe the DOE liked our project is because we wanted to use this infrastructure as the basis for multiple iron-rich cathode products. So use the same infrastructure for LMFP and produce that product when the industry is ready to adopt that product. And then use that as the basis upon which to go to LMX as well in the future. LMFP is obviously a well-known chemistry, but not as well industrialized. The value proposition of LMFP is that you get a dual voltage curve to get a higher energy density as compared to LFP through the introduction of manganese. And we are working with Saint-Gobain Ceramics. Saint-Gobain is a French multinational, one of the world's largest automotive glass manufacturers, large specialty chemicals and building materials business. And they wanted to work with us on a precursor-free LMFP solution. And so we announced that relationship earlier this year after several, I think close to 18 months of technical development work. And we're bringing that product alongside our partner Saint-Gobain to pilot scale production imminently. The LMX product, the goal of that product was to get to an iron-rich cathode active material that could be competitive on an energy density basis at a pack level for your standard NMC 622 cathode. So the two constraining variables to produce that were, can we use existing production equipment that's already at scale in the world? And the second is, can we use existing material supply chains? So there's plenty of companies out there that are going after very unique, niche, bespoke, esoteric chemistries. Good luck to them, because there's a place in the world in multiple different segments of energy storage for these new innovative products to come out to market. But the constraining variables that we wanted to use in designing the product portfolio of this business was what can get to market quickly and what can generate cash flow quickly, so that we can use the self-sustaining cash flow as the virtuous flywheel to bring even new, better products out to market, rather than focusing on one faraway chemistry for 10 years and bringing it out to market in the way that some of our industry peers have done over the last 10 years.
So, Vivas, the key question that's asked is, if you factor in that government grant and any of the IRA credits that apply to you, how competitive can you be in something like LFP in the North American market against China products?
The question now that every automotive buyer is asking themselves is, what is going to be my basis for landed cost comparison? So landed cost is from the point of production to the point of consumption, including all tariffs and duties. What is the cost of your product? I'll tell you why it's impossible for me to answer this question right now. Not that I don't know my own numbers and my own production basis. I don't know what the landed cost comparison is going to be until we see the executive action that President Trump takes when he takes office in January. That's going to be a major determinant for our own manufacturing footprint strategy in terms of building in the US versus building in other Inflation Reduction Act compliant countries. It's the landed cost basis comparison.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And just on a broader outlook of us, so we've seen LFP obviously do extremely well in China. What are your thoughts on LFP and possible permutations like LMFP where do you think it can land in terms of market share in the US or North America on an EV and ESS basis?
I'm very optimistic about LFP as a chemistry. Back in 2021, when we were coming up with the first product thesis for Mitra Chem, and we chose to go after LFP as our first product, it was a real head scratcher for a lot of industry observers. The thesis that was given back to us was, look, this is a low performing, low margin product. Why are you going after this first? There's so many other better products. There's so many other future chemistries you should be going after. And at the time, what I didn't tell them, which I'll say very vocally now, the last deal that I was involved with at Tesla, and when I say involved, I want to give credit. There's other people who championed it and got it negotiated and signed, and you know who they are. But I was involved in the initial early conversations that Tesla was having on adopting LFP after being 100% nickel rich. And here we are 5 years after the Tesla CATL deal was announced, and over 50% of the units of vehicles that Tesla produces today use LFP as the basis. Increasingly so now, you see announcements from GM, from Ford, from Stellantis, from BMW, from VW, all about how they want to adopt LFP as being the cathode chemistry of choice for their mass market and medium duty trucking products, which are the fastest growing segments and also will become the highest volume segments. I was very bullish on LFP back then. I'm even more bullish now. I think the rest of the industry has caught up. Sometimes these things take a while to happen, but we just knew that if we made the right bet in 2021 and we weathered the difficulty of lots of skepticism and questions up front, that by the time the industry shifted towards mass market and cost consciousness, that we would end up winning. What I didn't foresee in 2021 is the macroeconomic trend around tariffs and the macroeconomic trend around high inflation and the impact that was going to have towards a rapid shift towards cost model prioritization from the automotive OEMs. One of the biggest reasons for why autos want to switch from nickel rich to iron rich in general is because it just makes their cost model look better. It makes the margin potential of the vehicles better for them without sacrificing too much in the way of performance on the pack level. When it comes to ESS, I mean, the story's already been told. Of the cathode chemistries that are out there today, LFP is the clear winner. Now, the question is, what will be the future cathode chemistry that wins? Because I think sodium-ion is coming up a very big way. I want to give lots of credit to companies out there that took the sodium-ion bet starting 1 to 2 years ago that are now starting to see prime time. In China, you're really starting to see sodium-ion explode in ESS as well. So we'll see what ends up happening. But today, LFP has a commanding market share in ESS. I expect that both market share and volume are going to grow for both segments. And I'm very excited that we are championing this product here in North America.
Right. And something else that's rising up the ranks of us is AI. And if you look at the tables and the projected estimate on the number of AI, the data centers globally, the US is by far and away the most dominant. So when we discussed it previously, you've mentioned the importance of uninterrupted power. How big a deal is this then for energy storage and demand for lithium?
So let's get some definitions up front on the problem that we're trying to solve over here. Because AI, artificial intelligence, I feel like, is a word that's being thrown around a lot with a lot of excitement. What is artificial intelligence? Everybody has a different definition. Mine is the way that you have interacted with computers or with computing machines in the last 10 years has been for information access, for communication, and for computation on problems that are designed by humans. And what the paradigm is now shifting to is that the machines themselves will be able to design the problems in addition to solving the problems. So in those three categories, information, computation, communication, you now are moving to, here's a very simple and relatable example for a lot of people. Instead of going to Google and searching for a recipe and going through 5 different websites before you find the recipe that you want to cook tonight, you just tell your Chat GPT or your Google Gemini or your Grok AI, whatever you want to use. I want to cook tonight. Give me a recipe. Here's the ingredients I have, and it will just give it to you. It's framing the problem, it's designing the problem, it's solving the problem, and it's removing multiple different steps. Now, the way in which it can do this is that you need efficient chips and you need robust software. When it comes to chip efficiency, that's where this question around data centers comes. Computation requires so much energy. Data centers are getting so large. And to do increasingly complex computation, you need large time windows, which means you need something called uninterruptible power. So you have backups to backups to backups to the power. This is why the global trend around increased electricity demand and increased power demand driven by AI is a concept that's really taken hold in 2024. And as a matter of fact, I would personally go as far as to say that this is probably the biggest energy industry story of the year. It's how quickly power for AI, as driven by increased electrification, has taken hold in the consciousness of regulators, of big tech, and even of consumers. And this is another big catalyst for renewable energy. Because the cheaper you can bring your energy, the cheaper you can bring your computation, the more complex computation you can do. This is why you now have, for example, Microsoft signing a long-term offtake and investment for 3 Mile Island for nuclear power. So as I think about what are the segments of energy storage that are set to grow that may be underinvested or under-discussed, one of the things that I brought up with the both of you gentlemen when I saw you last week was uninterruptible power supply for data centers. The United States today is the undisputed leader in terms of data center capacity. I mean, infrastructure investing is cool again because of data centers. It's not long before the rest of the world also tries to catch up, right? Just because the United States has a commanding lead today doesn't mean that others won't try to catch up. I'll give you one more example of this. Saudi Arabia, which is of course the oil-rich nation that we know it for, is now trying to become the data center capital of the world also, because they see that this is an effective hedge against oil, but also is a efficient way in which to grow their role as a central node as being a technology powerhouse for the technologies of the future.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And just with us in terms of increased demand and energy for these centers, how do you see the sort of interplay or competition between nuclear and lithium-ion?
The energy stack is diverse, and you need multiple different sources of electricity. And it's not always due to scientific reasons. It's due to regulatory, it's due to permitting, it's due to customer perception, it's due to ROI reasons. And what I'm going to say is every single source of electricity generation, of energy storage and transmission and distribution is growing. We need as much of it as we can get. It is now growing faster than GDP because of AI. This is a unique trend. This hasn't happened in about 6 or 7 decades at this point. There's a place in the world for both renewables in terms of solar and wind paired with lithium-ion batteries and with nuclear.
Okay, so they both win, and it makes sense. I mean, in advanced developed economies, you're even seeing efficiency. So energy demand was actually slipping below GDP, but now you're saying suddenly we're ahead of it. So in terms of the quantums we're talking about, it isn't just on the margins. These can be pretty big numbers.
These are massive numbers, and this is why when President Trump, so putting aside the statements that have been made by President Trump on oil and gas, where he's been a big proponent, one thing that he has talked a lot about as a focus for his upcoming administration is going to be U.S. energy security and decreasing energy costs in the United States. The best way in which you decrease your energy costs is you increase every single source of cheap energy possible. And the best way to do that in the United States today, the will is there, the capital markets are there, the technology is there. What hasn't necessarily been there has been the market forces to drive regulatory reform. One thing I'm really hoping to see in 2025 and 2026, when there's a united House, Senate, and White House, is a comprehensive energy reform bill. I don't know how high it is on the priority stack, but this is a unique generational opportunity that we have to get it done. By the way, just to be clear, even if it was a united Democratic White House, House, and Senate, I would have said the same thing. Because you need unity across the three branches to get something this big passed.
There's actually a permitting bill. There's a permitting bill that might get passed in the lame duck. I don't know. There's some skepticism, but the Barrasso Manchin permitting bill is there, right? And the talk is like the Republicans may not let it pass because they want to get more or better, but this is meant not only for mining permitting. There's major lament from clean energy, solar and wind and other clean energy developers that the NEPA and other permitting regulatory red tape is preventing the deployment of clean energy projects and connectivity to the grid. So fingers crossed. It doesn't look certain, but like in the next week or two, we might know like this permanent. I remember at the benchmark event in June in DC, where Manchin got up there, he said, "Look, they're just playing politics. It was ready in June." So we'll see if that happens, and fingers crossed, because I really think it's probably not as high on the priority list of the Republicans when they come in January. The number one priority is the 2017 tax bill.
Yes.
And that's going to be their focus, and they're looking for pay-fors. It was on the tape today, from Reuters, that they're going to look to, cut EV subsidies, cut the, EV charging stations, and deploy it, maybe to domestic mining for defense reasons. But to your point, I want to just draw on some of the things that you mentioned. You said Google is going nuclear with 3 Mile Island, but that's going to be
Microsoft.
It's Microsoft. Microsoft, 3 Mile Island. Nuclear, as far as I understand, anything new nuclear and even a restart of that is going to take many, many, many years. There was on the tape Google partnering with Intersect Power last week for and Intersect Power is a private company that's raised $1 billion in equity and $5 billion in project finance, with the express purpose, it says here, of connecting gigawatts of solar, wind, and battery projects directly to massive new electricity loads, including data centers. So here you have, this is a major deal, Google, solar plus wind plus batteries. And I'm assuming that those are going to be lithium powered batteries. I forget what it says in the article, but there was another one in
It's
China.
the best and most relevant technology today for something like this.
So on that topic, so you brought up sodium ion as a threat. You also brought up LFP as a dominant, certainly in energy storage, but also in the U.S. What's the geopolitics of making LFP? Half of Tesla's batteries are LFP, but they're all made in China. So
that's exactly why my company exists.
Yeah,
we want to work on bringing LFP CAM supply outside of China in a meaningful way for the first time ever.
Okay.
There's plenty of players who are downstream of us, who are doing cell, who we need to see step up and also do cell. That's also why it's my opinion, and I feel this very strongly. President Trump has said that in his administration, he would be willing to welcome Chinese industrial leaders to come and build in the US as long as the jobs are made in the United States. I would be very open to seeing a Chinese LFP cell leader be invited to come and build here in the US. It will spur the entire ecosystem to be built. And I'll be very clear about this. A lot of my industry colleagues don't agree with me on this, and I'm happy to have that debate. But the reason why I feel so strongly about this is I saw what happened personally when Tesla went to Shanghai. It spurred the entire EV and battery industry in China to up their game when the market leaders showed up. Let's do the same over here. The entire semiconductor industry supply chain in the United States has upped their game because TSMC came to build in Phoenix, Arizona. And here's the narrative violation. They're doing it on budget, ahead of schedule. So I don't want to hear from anybody that things can't get built on time or on budget in the United States. Here's a very clear example of something very complex getting built. The reason why that's true is because there's significant government support from local, state, and federal level to see TSMC succeed. And the same can happen for any players out there. I don't want to minimize the difficulty of building these projects. I'm responsible for developing one of these projects myself as well. It's very complicated to get the budget right and the timing right. So my comment was not at all meant to cast aspersion on anybody who's trying. Actually, it's to champion that when the government steps up to help US entrepreneurs in the industrial space like this, positive outcomes can still be realized here in our market.
And that's perfect timing to come to my next question, which ties in with what you said earlier, is in your mind, Vivas, what are the important trends that investors need to pay attention to coming up? Where are the opportunities?
This is the chance for reindustrialization to happen in a very big way here in the United States. This is the most bipartisan issue that we've seen other than and in conjunction to China. Energy reform is something both sides want. More US industrial jobs is something both sides want. What I'm most curious to see is what will the first executive orders around tariffs look like? What will be the timbre of the new US-China trade war? What does that mean for landed cost, which is the primary metric that buyers, of which I used to be one, think their entire lives about?
That's fair enough. And broadly speaking, you know, we saw a lot of, certainly on the EV side, a lot of SPACs launching. Howard and I always joked about premature e-speculation. A lot of these things have come down a long way. We've seen what's happened with Northvolt. Is there still institutional investor support for the battery supply chain theme, or has that dropped off with all of these corrections or collapses in these shares?
Can I reframe your question? It's
Sure.
What would make this thematic attractive for institutional investors? You need two things. You need government and you need procurement. So for government, you need legislation, policy, and funding. And we have the trifecta now in the United States. Between tariffs, IRA, BIL, and various different local and state funding sources, you have significant government support for reindustrialization. The second is you need procurement. And this is where I think US industry can step up a little bit more. It's you need the big downstream customers to write offtakes and to guarantee minimum purchases so that the capacity can be built. And this goes back to the point, coming full circle to the beginning of the interview that I did when I talked about my experience as a buyer at Tesla, where my job was to go out and guarantee the demand so that for the first time ever, 5+ year contracts could be signed in the lithium industry. And the producers could have the business justification to go and build the capacity that they needed to do to service those contracts, knowing that a blue chip customer with a strong balance sheet was waiting on the other side to purchase. When investors see that, they're willing to come in with the capital. Then it's just a question of what's the price, and that's based on what is the risk of the project.
On this topic, GM has been very active in investing in the supply chain with MP Materials for magnets, and most recently, Lithium Americas. They took a project level interest with a 20-year offtake. And by the way, that's for carbonate. So they are definitely looking at LFP cathode chemistries. They had invested with LG. I think they're now selling their interest in the LG joint venture, one of their battery joint ventures, but they're still partnered with them. So I don't think they always want to be equity interested. And then separately, you had Ford wanted to do a licensing agreement with CATL. I always thought that, I mean, that was kind of like a workaround because they really wanted to form a joint venture. And I'm hopeful. And we had Michael Dunn on the podcast a couple of days ago. And he's, like you said, that the moment in China was when Tesla made EVs cool in China. And then that's why BYD 4 years later really upped their game. So I think you're right. And we would love, we're advocating for, I thought you might say that would be competition for you for like CATL to kind of come to America, but you're saying it'll more popularize.
In my
LFP.
mind, this industry is not a fixed pie as much as it is a garden that we should all grow together. When you have a big industry champion come in, it results in the entire industry growing better for everybody.
Okay. And do you see from your, I mean, you examined a lot at Tesla. I think Rohan Patel was at Tesla and he was a prominent Obama person. He's since left, but I've heard him speak at Benchmark, and you were at Benchmark, advising the government. My whole history for the last 10 years has been witnessing an adversarial kind of commentary between China and the U.S. It's a us versus them. It's a competition. But I remember when I was listening to RFK Jr. when he was running his independent campaign on the All In podcast, his opinion was that we should kind of like change that dynamic a bit and just be more friendly and collaborative and like obviously trust but verify, but to just generally have a more positive approach to it. And we interviewed Steve Levine, which we're, I guess, going to publish just before this. And he was remembering, Nixon goes to China and Reagan, with Gorbachev, just as a observer, you went to, I guess, Rice University before you went to Stanford. I think there's James Baker, there's the Rice School. So I think you have some diplomatic, tea leaf reading you could do here. Do you think, from your observation of the administration as it's coming about, that this is a likely outcome? Because at the moment, it's a contrarian thought, that we're going to have this, Trump goes to China, Nixon goes to China, grand bargain type of attitude and welcoming, CATL, BYD, et cetera. What do you think?
I'm going to limit the scope of my US-China comments to specifically our industry, because it's the place where I'm the most informed, but also the place that I think that's most relevant to this conversation. And just reemphasize, US industry, we recognize that we are behind. Let's just start by saying that anybody who's a CEO of a company in the battery supply chain in the US, if they don't come out here and publicly admit that the US battery supply chain is lagging behind the Chinese battery supply chain, they shouldn't be doing this job. The best companies in our industry, they are in China. How do I define best? It's fastest innovation pathway, fastest path to qualification with the customer, most capacity. Those companies are all in China. Let's just go learn from them and let's invite them here so we learn from them. I think this is going to be good for the whole industry. Let me be clear. Mitra Chem is a company that was founded in the United States, capitalized mostly by US capital. We're very fortunate to have DOE capital, but what I'm saying over here is not mutually exclusive from my advocacy that a Chinese market leader coming to build in the US may actually be good to spur the rest of the industry to up their game as well.
That's great. So where are you in your funding cycle? From Chamath seed, could you walk us through whatever is publicly available or you're comfortable saying? Like, how much capital equity have you raised to date, and how many funding rounds? And what's next in terms of milestones? When might you be in commercial production? Is there any scope for you to go public, etc.?
Chamath led a $20 million Series A. Our Series B was led by GM Ventures, and there were a few other major participants in that round. The ones that we've publicly announced and put press releases out on are Alpha Wave Ventures and TechMet Mercuria, InQtel, which is, of course, the funding arm of the U.S. intelligence community. A few more strategics joined that round with GM. So the other ones that we listed were Xeon Corporation, GS Corporation, and there's plenty more financial sponsors behind them that were in the round as well. So
how large was that round?
55.
55. So you've raised 75 in equity so far?
Yes, and right now we're focused primarily on just executing our Muskegon, Michigan project. We're very committed to building in the United States. We're very committed to doing so in the community of Muskegon with our partner Sun Chemical. And we are committed to making sure that this product has a home for any cell maker in the US that wants to make LFP in an Inflation Reduction Act compliant manner. This was the original thesis of the company. And after 4 years, we're finally in the position now where we can start fulfilling our promise towards scale up.
Sounds good. Okay. Rodney, do you have any more questions?
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, Vivas, thank you. I really appreciate your coming on. It's been like a bit too long. We've been observing your progress, and you mentioned InQtel. We were advising a SPAC of theirs that was looking at a lithium project and ended up getting alternative funding. So another big deal we were looking at that unfortunately did get funded, but with a different group. So they are very smart guys, very connected to. I think they have 35% long-term VC track record funding things through the U.S. government. So your connectivity to the U.S. government is great. Yeah, I think it's very interesting. I'm very optimistic. You're seeing the same things, that Trump has surrounded himself with not just billionaires, but billionaire entrepreneurs that understand the future, that have a lot of common sense. And in the sector which you mentioned, where we are in and we are behind, they recognize that. And I don't think that Trump is going to he doesn't like to lose, right? And certainly not in the auto industry. And with Elon, his best friend now, you're going to see some sensible policies. That's just reading the tea leaves. And you're right, interest rates coming down will impact the funding environment. It'll impact the ability to afford more cars. If Trump passes a car interest deduction, just like there's a mortgage interest deduction, this was one of the ideas that he had. That might replace an EV subsidy, just give everybody an opportunity to offset that. I mean, that could spur overall car purchases. So anyway, I'm optimistic, and you're right. If you start seeing investments of that type make the thematic investing environment for this sector will again be interesting. It won't be on a energy transition, net zero, climate, save the world philosophy, as I think it was under Biden, but it'll be under a different guise, just better, faster, cheaper. This is the future. Anyway, that's my view, and good luck, Vivas, and would love to have you on, again in the future.
Well, thank you both very much. Look, I'm an avid reader of the newsletter, and I love the work that you guys are doing. And congratulations on your 100th issue of the newsletter as well. So thank you both, gentlemen.